Hello everyone, it's Nelly's Nest here, doing my second comic breakdown video for my series Wallace and Gromit, or you may know it as Cheese Dog and Friends. That's what they call it in Portugal. Yeah, yeah, that's it. So today I'll just be kind of breaking down how I made the series, what I did, and kind of like how I made all the parts or how I designed the story and whatnot. So first of all, we'll go with the first part. The first part, or coming up with a base idea, was pretty difficult. Within all comics, though, obviously you got to start as a base. I don't remember how I thought of it. I remember sitting at work and someone mentioned Wallace and Gromit to me, and my head was like, well, Wallace really likes cheese. Would he do anything for cheese? And the original idea, I think, was that he was going to try and solicit Gromit for some kind of act of prostitution or something horrible to get some cheese. I decided against that because it was too raunchy and just kind of too out there. So I sat there and I kept spitballing, and eventually I remembered that Wallace was an inventor, and I was like, he invents stuff and he likes cheese. And then I can't really recall how I made the connection, but at some point I was like, what if he made an invention that made cheese? And I was like, well, he's got to be able to keep recreating it, and cheese comes from an animal. So naturally, if cheese comes from an animal and he has to keep recreating it, he'd want an animal that would be alive, that can keep making him more and more cheese. And that's pretty much where the base idea for the comic came from the idea of him trying to create a self-sustaining cheese machine. So I hope you can kind of see that thought process there. You can see how I eventually ended up tangenting into that. With the base themes of the comic, I pretty much went for, originally I was going for dread, so just being dread-inducing, kind of psychological horror, something that you go to bed and you think about and you just don't want to think about it, just like a comic that you want to repress as soon as you see it. So the original 3 parts were going on that kind of theme of dread, which was good. The first one was really brilliant. It set the scene fantastically. I wanted to set it as Wallace still being himself, because that makes it a lot more unsettling. If you're doing a comic with pre-made characters, the most unsettling thing you can do is keep the character as himself. Make him talk like himself and act like himself, but he's doing something out of character. It makes it seem a lot more surreal and kind of attaches you a lot more to the story itself, because it makes the character's familiar, his actions aren't, but it still keeps you attached to it because he's familiar as a character. So yeah, part 1, I wanted to keep Wallace kind of talking in the way that he normally does, just, being some classic Wallace. He's calling him Grom and Lad and all that kind of jazz. Part 2 was actually a little harder to think of, so I never actually intended to make it a series. Originally, it was just a once-off comic. It just so happened that everyone liked it so much that I decided to kind of go ahead and, I don't know, just sort of like make it make it an actual series. So part 2 was a bit difficult because I didn't really plan for it at all. And I was like, well, how do you kind of get more disturbing than someone splicing their dog's DNA with every cheese in the world so he never runs out of cheese? Like, it was a bit of a difficult thing to do, but I eventually settled on the idea of like, okay, he's a cheese monster, and what do you do with cheese, That was how I came up with the second part. I started thinking, what are all the things you can do with cheese? You can grate it, so I thought, do I want to have a comic where Wallace is grating Gromit? I decided against it because it seemed a little bit too twisted. It seemed kind of twisted for the sake of it, instead of being twisted organically. And that's something that you want to focus on too, that's really important within art and series, is that if something's kind of demented or really hectic or really dark, you don't ever want to make something dark for the sake of it. You want to make it feel like an organic progression of what someone would do. So with that in mind, I was like, okay, well, Gromit probably doesn't want to be there. So let's say Gromit's trying to escape. When Gromit's trying to escape, he has, some kind of thing on that burns him and then smokes his cheese, because you smoke cheese. So that was my base idea, is that I wanted to make Gromit smoked, and then instead of, making him just set Gromit on fire or something, because that would once again be a little too twisted, I decided to make it a shock collar, because you give dogs shock collars. I mean, I don't, but some people do. Ugh, I would not ever do that to my dog. But you give some dogs shock collars, so it made a lot of sense for Gromit to be wearing one if he's trying to escape. And then electricity makes stuff smoke, can burn things on high levels. So, it was like, boom, I can turn Gromit into smoked cheese by giving him an electrical collar. So that was how we got to that part. Part 3, this is kind of the peak of it being dread-inducing. So this one, you guys all know, this is the one where he puts the nail through the dog's foot. That was a really troubling scene to draw. Not because I felt bad about it. It's fiction. I mean, it's literally not real. I don't really care that much. But I knew that once I had done that comic, I had to diverge routes. It was like I had made it the most hectic thing I could, which is, putting a nail through a live dog's foot. And anything above that, in that same category of, being hectic and dark, would need to be something really extreme. So I knew that once I made that comic, I would have to diverge the paths of the comic and then find a different way to make it interesting. Because I didn't just want to keep making it gory and making it troubling in that sort of way. It's not really my jam. I love the twisted comics, but I think after a while, twisted art, especially in the form of a story, it gets a little old, and when it becomes predictable, it kind of just becomes a little more sick, I would say. It makes it look more deranged, I suppose, I would say. So in part 3, he nails him to the floor, and then that signified the turning point of the story, where I was like, okay, well, I need to make this less about, inflicting pain, and more about, something that's more daunting. So I went from dread-inducing to daunting, and that you can see that in part 4. In part 4, it's when he's trapped inside the VR headset. That's a very daunting idea, to be like, Gromit thinks that he's free, he thinks that he's escaped, he thinks that none of this is real, but it is. He's just trapped in a fake version of reality that Wallace has kept him in. That's a I really loved that comic because it was a great diversion from the kind of torture of the first 3 comics and then into much more of a psychological aspect, psychological daunting aspect, whatever you want to call it. Sorry if I'm looping back myself a little bit. It's that, I don't often talk about my comics this much in depth. I usually just seek them and create them, but yeah. So part 4 was the psychological aspect of it. It was daunting, troubling. You start to lose hope. You start to think that Grom's trapped there forever. And that feeling of being trapped forever, knowing that Grom will never escape, knowing that his reality is false, that he's going to be tortured forever for cheese, it's a really heavy-hitting point. I'd say it's arguably heavier hitting than seeing the nail go through his foot. A nail is, a temporary pain. The pain will go away. But being trapped inside a virtual reality forever, that's like, eternal torment. So it's a really, really heavy-hitting idea. Part 5 was pretty simple. So I would honestly, it was a really easy part to do. I was like, well, he's trapped in VR. How is he going to get out of the VR headset? Because that was obviously the next progression of the story, that Grom had to leave the VR headset and had to go back to reality to have some kind of redemption arc, to try and escape or whatever it was. So pretty much, I just went for, I would say, probably the most obvious route. Part 5 is my least favorite part. It's kind of funny. I had a bit of a chuckle at it. But looking back, I think it's not nearly as well written as the other parts. But with part 6, it does play well into part 6. And yeah, so moving on to part 6, one of my favorite parts of the entire series. The art in it was just fantastic. Not to pat myself on the back too much, but I really, really liked it. And I just found that the mood of that comic really, really suited what I was going for. It really suited what I wanted from the comic, and that was that it showcased that side of Grom that you don't really see. His really emotional side, his scarred side. You've just spent the most of the comic seeing him in pain and crying and not really doing anything. But that part 6 made him a lot more human. It made him have a lot more depth, and it made it a lot scarier that this creature was captured inside this virtual reality or being tortured and stuff. At least I found gave me a lot more of a connection to Grom as the character. And yeah, this is still going off the theme of part 4. So part 4, the theme switched from dread and horror to more daunting and psychological. And then in part 6, it switched from daunting and psychological and then it gradually switched throughout the comic into, I guess, wholesome, uplifting. Because pretty much within comics, within these story comics, you don't want to stay on one theme for too long. It just, as I said, it becomes kind of stale, it becomes a little boring. You want to constantly switch it up and keep people on their toes. Subversion is a really important part of any comic creation. And yeah, I tend to use subversion as much as I possibly can to make sure I try to make people never know what's going to happen next. So in the ending of part 6, he breaks out of the virtual world, and then we have a tone shift into what the current comic is, which is wholesome, uplifting, ready to go. Grom's kind of on that point. He's on the verge of finally getting his redemption arc. If we look into part 7, really simple part, but it was just really built up. It was built up to show you, to slow the series down a little bit before the finale, because the finale is the next part that's coming out. There's only 8 parts to the series, unfortunately. And 2, to show you the magnitude of the strength that Gromit had, the strength of his will to fight, how angry he was, and also importantly, to give you a quick tie-in back to Wallace. That part was really crucial because it makes you hate Wallace again, It starts off with him being like, oh, my cheese platter's rumbling. Doesn't really care about Gromit at all. All he's worried about is his friggin' cheese. So that part reignites your hate for Wallace, and then gives you all this hope about Grom, which is a really, really brilliant. Well, I mean, it's a great thing to do before a finale. You want people to be invested in the the core aspects of your series. The core aspects, the 2 of them that you can find in this series are Wallace being menacing, selfish, etc. It creates that character again, shoves it in your face that he's selfish and menacing, etc. And then the other core aspect is Gromit being a monster, a cheese monster, and Gromit wanting to escape. So in this part 7, it smashes those 2 core aspects into you, and yeah, it kind of reminds you what the series is all about, which I won't reveal yet, but I'm sure you'll all love the ending. If you have any kind of questions or any advice or any heads up on what I should do or how I should make these videos, please do let me know. I'm very kind of new to doing blog videos or vlog videos about me talking about my creative process. If you want me to slow down at all or speed up, or you want me to mention anything else, please do let me know. I really appreciate all your support and you guys listening. We recently hit over $800 a month on Patreon, which is friggin' insane. I can literally almost pay my entire rent with my art. So thank you all so much for sticking around. I genuinely appreciate it more than anything. You're all candles in the black room of life, guiding my path, guiding me down the path of prosperity. Yeah, we'll go for that. That sounds nice. All right, well, thanks for listening. Thanks for your time, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.